Welcome everyone to the 7th round of the Prague Masters 2025. With the white pieces, we have the young Turkish talent Ediz Gurel. His opponent, the Czech super player Nguyen won. This is going to be an exciting clash. Until now, Ediz has been super solid in the tournament. He has had 6 draws and 1 loss. Nguyen has also been quite solid, and this promises to be a very exciting clash. The players get ready, shake hands, and off we go. Ediz is just 16 years old and he opens the game with 1 e4. What is Wan's move going to be? Is he going to go aggressive with the Sicilian? No, he decides to be solid. He plays his pawn to e5. e4, e5 on the board. And knight to f3. The knight comes out and attacks the pawn on e5. Wan defends it with knight to c6. And will we see the Ruy Lopez here? Or will we see the Italian? That's the question. Ediz brings his bishop out to b5. If you look at Ediz Gurel here, he often makes his moves and then just goes back into this pose where he has both his hands on his head, and it's incredible the way in which he's just completely focused in this tournament. He has nothing else on his mind apart from the game. He has nowhere else to go. He's just totally into the zone. So bishop comes back to a4 and back into the thinking pose. Meanwhile, Wan is a big opening expert. He brings his knight out to f6. One of the main lines here is to castle. d3 is also playable. So he shot castles here. And of course you can take on e4. You can also play b5. You can also play bishop e7. You can play bishop c5. So the bishop goes to e7. And now you are threatening to take this pawn on e4. So Ediz actually captures. This is the delayed exchange variation. And he takes back with the pawn. Now the point is, if you take on e5, I can take on e4. The bishop on e7 shields the king from the rook coming there. So he plays his pawn to d3. We have like an anti-Berlin here. But just with the fact that black has an extra move on a6 that black got. Does that make any difference? Not so sure. But bishop comes out to e3. And now Wan simply castles here. And white's going to now just develop the knight. Knight comes out to c3. So very simple developing moves played here by white. And black has the bishop pair. But a slight congestion in the position. One of the normal ways to play here is rook e8 with the idea of f6. Knight goes to f8 to e6. You put your pawn to c5. These are all standard plans in the position. Ediz goes a4. And he wants to clamp down on the queen side with the move a5. So maybe a5 makes a lot of sense. He plays b6 also makes a lot of sense. If you push a5 here, then he wants to go b5. That's the plan. a5 is met with b5. So Ediz instead goes knight to e2. And he's planning to put his knight on g3, eventually to the f5 square. He can also push the pawn in the center with d4. Nguyen goes b5. Now, here Ediz can take the pawn, but then after cb you undouble the pawns. The black pawn is coming to c5, so doesn't look great. Maybe knight to g3. Ediz just completely ignores this. Now the question here wasn't c5, knight b8, knight c6 or knight f8, knight e6 a better plan? Well, Wan doesn't agree. He goes bishop to f8. He's trying to play this slightly differently, but his position has started to become a bit uncomfortable. King h1 played here. This is a useful move. Later on, f4 can come on the board and the king will be well placed on the h1 square. Now Nguyen plays his knight to b6. He wants to attack the pawn on a4. And I think one of the ideas is to simply push it down to a5. Yes, he goes b3. He doesn't want to push forward. He just bolsters his pawn here on a4. And now the bishop comes out to d7. Let's see what Ediz continues the game with. He plays his knight to d2. Maybe the knight is not going anywhere here, but he just wants to free his f pawn down the board. Bishop comes to b4, putting pressure on the knight. Also bishop c3, attacking the rook on a1. f4 played here, just opening up the f file down the board, putting pressure on the f7 point. A pawn takes pawn has been taken. And now Ed is thinking whether he should take with the bishop or the rook. He takes bishop f4. Black has to play this carefully. Slowly and steadily, white is building a formidable pressure on the king side with all his pieces. Bishop comes to c3, attacking the rook here. The point being, if you go rook b1, I can try to win your a4 pawn. So Ediz decides to... Ooh, he's not moving his rook. He thinks here and pushes his pawn to a5. Wow, what a move. And now the point is, if you take here, I take with the queen, knight is hanging, and if you save the knight to c8, I have bishop h6, an incredible move with the knight jumping here. So that's the reason why after a5 he moves his knight to c8 and Ediz calmly plays his rook to a2. Bishop comes to e6. And now he plays his knight to f3. White's position is a picture of harmony here. All the pieces nicely positioned. Nguyen has to play this carefully now. Bishop to g4, a good move. Pinning the knight. He wants to take here on f3, but h3 played. Asking a question, he takes bishop f3. Queen takes on f3. Ooh, pressure down to the f7 point. Queen to d7. And now if knight to f5, maybe just entering in could be a good idea. But instead he finds another beautiful move. Knight e2. Attacking the bishop here. If the bishop goes back to f6, we have d4 followed by e5. He comes back bishop to b4. But that's not going to stop this central expansion here with d4 and e5. Ediz comes back. It's one thing to have a good position against strong players like Nguyen, but quite another to actually be able to convert it. c3, attacking the bishop. The bishop drops back to f8. Now Ediz plays his bishop back to g3, opening up the queen and the rook towards the f7 point. f6 played here by Nguyen. And the knight jumps to f4. It is definitely looking at the h5 square, putting pressure on g7, f6. Bishop goes to d6. The knight jumps to h5, pressurizing these two pawns. And now, very important to keep the status quo, play queen e6, queen f7, but instead he takes on g3, and that is a huge mistake. That is a huge mistake, very quickly taken back by Ediz. He's threatening now, knight takes f6, check, winning the entire house. So king h8 makes a lot of sense, but now white has a beautiful move. Try to think, what should he do? Very close to victory now, Ediz, if he finds this move. And he does. e5 is the move. And the very important point is that after fe5, you have rook f2 trying to get in, and if knight d6, I still get in. If you take with the knight, it's a mate here. And that's the point because of which you can't take the pawn on e5. So queen f7. And now Ediz takes here. You can't win the knight because of queen g7. And the position has gone downhill so quickly. g6 played, trying to keep the king side close. But now knight g7, attacking the rook on e8. Rook goes to f8. And he plays his rook to e2, trying to get into the e file. Knight jumps into d6. I guess the point being, if you play rook e7, I can take and attack here. And black is the one who's now better, because after king moves, you have king takes g7. So that's the reason why Ediz finds another great move, knight e6. Attacking the rook, and if the rook moves, you have knight g5, attacking the queen and unblocking the f pawn. He goes rook a e8, but I believe now still knight g5 is a very powerful move. He finds it. The queen hardly has any squares left. Goes queen to d5. Now he plays pawn to c4. He keeps hassling the queen. The queen doesn't have too many squares. Yeah, where does it go? He takes the pawn. And Ediz takes back the pawn on c4. The queen is attacked once again. Nguyen takes the pawn on a5, and now it seems like the game is going to end. You know, you have rook takes rook, you have f7 somewhere. He takes first the rook. He takes back with the knight so that this pawn is not rushing away down the board. But knight takes e8. And pawn to c5. What a nice move. If you take here, I have knight e6 with a fork. So that's the reason why he plays queen a2, eyeing this diagonal, trying to protect himself. But now, very strong move, queen e5, threatening f7 checkmate. Nothing less, nothing more there. f7 is a huge threat, and there's just no way to prevent it. And you can see Nguyen is completely distraught there. He doesn't know what to do here. Well, it's resignable position, and he resigns. Ediz Gurel scores his first ever win at a super tournament. What a great game for the youngster, and a historic win for him. I'm sure he's going to go great guns in his career. Maybe someday he will reach the candidates. Maybe someday he'll become the world champion. And when he does all of that, this game will be very special for him, because it is his first ever win at a super tournament. A huge congratulations to Ediz for having played a beautiful game of chess.